Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal-Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Doug Kaminski. Doug is Chief Revenue Officer at Cobra Legal Systems. He has over 20 years of experience in the legal industry spanning 4 continents. Doug, you got to get up to 7. He specializes in helping organizations of all types and sizes understand and implement better processes along with technologies to simplify the complex legal workflows we so often have to deal with. He's a frequent speaker and published author and brings deep experience in the legal technology and service industries, having held leadership positions at Relativity, Semantic, Clearwell Systems, and Huron Consulting Group, now Concilio. Doug is a member of the Chicago Bar Association, the Detroit Bar Association. He's on the Global Advisory Council for EDRM, as well as the IGRM Revision Committee within EDRM, and is a fellow of the Claims and Litigation Management Alliance. And now that lockdown is over, Doug once again lives out of an airplane, it seems. Doug, welcome and glad you were able to join us.
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's funny, we had the prep call while I was in an airport yesterday.
So, that's right. But at least you're not trying to do this from a plane now. Bad idea. Or an airport. Not quite as bad, but still challenging. Well, I'd like to start, even though I gave a brief intro of you, with how you got from there to here. What brought you to the world of electronic discovery and ultimately took you to Cobra?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You hear people say when they're a kid, I want to be an astronaut or a fireman, but you never hear them say, I want to be an eDiscovery. So I did just kind of fall into it, but I was very fortunate that it was now 20 years ago this fall that I ran into this Mary Mack person. And so Mary taught me the ropes. I was at a little company called Fios. And so we started in eDiscovery. I was already in the law in corporate M&A and transactional type of services. But this gave me some more grounding on the dispute side of things. And it just kind of grew from there. I mean, I really am fortunate. I've been at some really excellent companies on both the software and the services side, which helps me. I'm kind of obviously a geek, data nerd, we'll say. So it works well for me to see both sides of those. How do we create and use the tools, as well as how do service companies do that to create better outcomes for clients?
And it gives you a deeper appreciation, I've come to learn, of the challenges as well as the opportunities on both sides of that equation.
Yeah, actually, that's a fair point. I mean, when you truly come up with some interesting technology, it can make a huge difference. And then when it doesn't work as well as it could, or when folks want it to do more things, they're going, this is great. What else can we make it do? Like you said, it's a challenge as well as a reward.
So that took you to eDiscovery from those early days with Mary at Fios till today. How did you end up where you are?
It's funny. Someone joked with me the other day is that How long have you been at Cobra? Is this like the longest you've been somewhere? I've been here 4 years, and it's not the longest. But this industry is always had a lot of movement and a lot of acquisitions, a lot of mergers, a lot of those types of things. So I've kind of watched where this world has been going and how it's developed from its early days, where we got $4,000 a gig to process data, and a large case was bumping up against 100 gigs. And I remember because while I was at FIOS, I got our first over a terabyte case, and it was interesting to see how things have developed since then, right? So our data universes have gotten bigger. So I started looking at, all right, what are better ways of managing this, and align myself with companies that did that. So the movement from Clearwell, for example, into Semantic kind of broadened that horizon into the archival and the upstream world. So then I started looking at, okay, well, there's more than email, right? There's compliance related to, at that time, Yahoo Messenger was the ephemeral messaging, and used heavily by energy traders, by the way. It was their only source of communicating with each other. So I was looking at how are people communicating, right? So we've gone through various evolutions throughout our time in terms of how we communicate. Like with my daughter, it's Instagram. I mean, it's not even text messages anymore. We use Instagram Messenger and send memes back and forth, but you get the idea. We communicate in the ways that make sense to us. So I just made sure my career path has been following that. And I'm just really fortunate because Cobra has allowed me to do things that I couldn't even do at a solution provider, to weld the people together and make better processes.
Well, then let's take a look at that in particular. What is it that you are doing and able to do now at Cobra?
Well, it's the people side of the equation that had always been missing. And when we look at reading the tea leaves or looking at where the puck's going, whatever analogy we want to use, what I've been seeing as a trend is project management. Like Mike Hortararo saw that years ago when he did his book on project management. The people side of the expertise has been one of the most important parts, as well as having really good practitioners that understand how to wield these tools in ways to create better outcomes. And that's what Cobra has allowed me to do is, I've always naturally just kind of tried to find solutions to things. Even when I was a kid, I was taking things apart and fixing things and making them work better. So growing up with that kind of idea, I always looked at things in that way. And I could do a certain amount of that at Relativity, but I didn't have the people side, right? Because you need the people to carry it through. And many corporations are hindered by their budgets, can't add FTEs, can't do other things. So the idea of fractional expertise and seconding expertise made a lot of sense to me. And Cobra does that really, really well, has for 14 years. And then we've added a much deeper tech spin now so that we can be very tech prescriptive. And our people are, majority of them are attorneys, but they've been doing this for a long time and have seen huge reviews, have seen contract workflows. I mean, we do so much for corporations and for their outside counsel that now we're able to, with that expertise kind of established, look at what technologies fit the best for the various equations. And it's been fantastic. I mean, we've grown immensely.
You mentioned, I think, fractional expertise.
Yes.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of times, and there's law firms that have come to us in the last couple of years, say during the lockdown, where their volume did not really go down, but they still didn't have access to the people that they needed to do this. And so we've had law firms seek out somebody said, hey, can we have somebody that's an RCA or better part-time to manage projects? And we're able to do that. And it's funny because traditionally in the space, they don't do that because they look at project management as kind of their expertise in stock and trade. So it's for use us and give us your data, use us and do this stuff, and you can have our PMs. But the reality is that people are looking for that expertise. That's the differentiator. The technology has become ubiquitous enough that you can find the good people, but running that and running it to its best degree to get the most out of the tool is where we generally see that gap. So we're even asked by other service companies, hey, can you step in take over this part of this project, it's way more advanced than we need. So fractionally, once again, we'll be brought in on a shorter term basis or sometimes longer term.
It sounds analogous to deconstructed dinners at a restaurant.
Yes, yeah.
So that people don't have to come to you for everything all at once, all put together, the fully baked cassoulet, for example, but instead can get just that portion that they need to meet their needs now.
Yeah, and it could be they need more of the duck confit or the white beans in this particular case for this particular recipe, and we can provide that.
What other, in addition to the growth and the importance of project management, what other trends are you seeing?
I definitely, and it's funny because just musing on this the other day, I've been at 3 conferences in the last 3 weeks, and so from Clock to the Masters Conference and all these places I've been, what I've been seeing as the trend truly is a much greater use of the tools and of AI in particular. We're seeing that far more commonly, and not just adopting it for the sake of adopting it. In other words, we're trying to break habits and break inertia. And let's face it, keywords are just inertia. We can get way beyond this. And Reveal did a great job of talking about that at the Masters Conference throughout and show how do we kind of just open our perspectives. And in a way, the pandemic has helped that, because for many people, it's allowed us to press pause in places to be able to say, oh, am I getting the value out of these kind of actions, or should I be doing something different? For some, it was baking bread. For others, it was, hey, I'm going to dig a little deeper into portable models. I'm going to dig a little deeper into how do I precede everything, or even prior to key terms? Can I use conceptual clustering and other things to suggest things up to me?
So why don't you give me some examples of some of the things that you all are doing or you are seeing folks doing with AI that helps them more effectively conduct the practice of law?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, because I think that's really what's at the back of it, is that practitioners are now seeing that we're, as Alicia Hawley says, we're not going to bow to our robot overlords. It truly is, we're going to harness these things to create better outcomes. So we're definitely seeing sentiment analysis, for example, and the wonderful roundabout writing style models that you have in Reveal AI to look at intent, right? So there's intent and there's impact when we're looking at the words that we're using, or sometimes even patterns of numbers.
So let's wind back a little bit. You mentioned roundabout and the roundabout writing styles. I suspect most people listening in on this really have no idea what you meant by that.
Yeah, I almost don't either, but fortunately, Dr. Arena explained it well enough that when, let's say, we're looking into a particular matter, in the earlier phases, I think you can approach a lot of these matters like investigations, because we're looking for patterns and we're looking for things. And, there's definitely some kind of allegations of wrongdoing of some sort, but we're looking for things. We're looking for what's actually going on here. And roundabout writing is helpful because when someone is lying, for example, they tend to use an entirely different tone. It becomes much more professional. They will use different words. They'll definitely become more verbose. They'll say more things. And that's the natural human tendency. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to approximate. If you don't have that person in front of you with a dim bulb above their head and water dripping somewhere that we can really interrogate them, we have to interrogate what they've said and done and find ways to be able to tease out what's actually occurring here. And the machine learning and the models help us do that in a way we couldn't unless, again, we were fortunate enough to be face to face. And even then it's fallible, right? So definitely when we see the patterns of their speech change from what it had been, we're talking very casually now, but could be we get way more professional. I've seen that myself. When someone gets a little angry, they're going to get more formal, more professional. Some people say swear more. So it's a variation of their standard pattern. And that's very, very helpful in finding.
You mentioned sentiment analysis as well. What do you mean by that? And
Sure.
what all are you able to do with it, and to what end?
Yeah, sentiment analysis is a very interesting one. So there's a use we had ages ago, actually, in some of the early days of sentiment analysis, where for a large airline manufacturer, we were looking at the communications of test pilots. And using sentiment analysis, we're able to tease out when they're under stress, even though it wasn't obvious, based on their writing style and based on the words they chose and the sentiments they tried to convey throughout their communications. And then they could be brought in for some screening to see, were they truly under some stress? Because we don't want to find out when they're up in the air and potentially crashing, because these are test pilots. These are some of the best. And like finely tuned engines, we do need to look at them a little more carefully. And these are just diagnostics. So sentiment analysis can be a diagnostic to help us find out what is going on and where is the pattern potentially going to be breaking.
You dropped in there as well a reference to AI models.
Yeah.
Once again, what's an AI model? What do you do with them? And how do they help?
I think the best way to think of AI models are just recipes. So you have particular outcomes you're looking for. So anti-money laundering, for example, is one such outcome. We're looking to see, is there any evidence of this? And so the computer can be trained well beyond keywords, obviously, using the various components of an AI model to be able to see. And what I like particularly about Reveal AI is it allows you to stack. You've got a lot of pre-built models, and you can kind of blend these, much like, again, you blend ingredients to get a particular recipe. And then you can tweak those for your particular circumstance. So think of it as kind of like object-oriented programming. You don't need you need the building blocks, but you need to know how to write all the source code top to bottom to get to the same outcome much faster and probably much more accurately, because you can use these components that are already pre-built for you. So with AML, or let's say, for example, theft of IP, we might be looking at regex and sensitive data. We might be looking at sentiment analysis to see are code words being used. We're looking to see flow of data, and is there a tendency for things to now start going to home email addresses or other email addresses as opposed to the business email addresses. References to external sources that we're now starting to store data in as a way to be able to move things around. So those are just some examples. General, but I think they prove the point.
I keep muting myself because the dog had been barking in the background, and nobody else really needs to hear that. He's quieted down, at least for now. You mentioned 3 types of uses of AI. The roundabout style, a very narrowly focused use, sentiment analysis, and then AI models. What other ways are you deploying AI to help clients?
A lot of ways that are not as, say, cool and sexy as in the dispute space. Digital subject access requests are one place we're doing that, because in essence, you've got sensitive data screens, entity extraction, and the association between all of that. And you have to do kind of a reverse redaction, because it's George says, okay, I want everything in my employment file and everything you guys have on me in this particular DSAR. We got to review this information, right, and take a look at this, and whether the request is to anonymize the data or to produce this data in such a way that everybody else is now, redacted out. I have to do so, and we have limited time in which to do those things. So AI is very, very helpful in reviewing and isolating and finding that information, so that it can be then validated by humans. Everything is redacted, ideally automatically. But more importantly, the entities are associated, so we can see this is George's Hotmail address, and this is George's address for his other home email, and this is his personal email at work. And then here's some email aliases he's on, and how do we identify and then redact those out or produce those to George? So DSAR requests is definitely another way.
So you're going to have to, so you're using the technology then to figure out for example, all the various email addresses I use. I assume you're also then using AI technology to help figure out various names I might go by.
That is
I
correct.
mean, there are obvious things like Doug versus Douglas, but
Yes.
there can be any number of other nicknames and the like. So the technology helps with that as well.
Yeah, it's very brilliant at the association between the communication medium, right? So here's might be our Slack, here might be all other things. So here's how I'm known in those communication channels, and here's how I'm known in the real world, which can vary.
What levels of adoption are you seeing with these and the other AI tools that you're making use of? What areas of resistance and what makes for easy acceptance?
Yeah, I think the non-dispute oriented places like DSARs, as we mentioned, we're doing a lot with contracts and extracting data points out of, say, legacy data systems. We're using it to triage data. Let's say we've got a large volume of custodial data for a matter that is now kind of either in limbo or is over. And we want to be able to harvest what information is in there, find the sensitive data. So again, it's more than just keywords. We need those kind of tools. And it doesn't make sense to say drop it into an e-discovery platform for two reasons. One, that's just overkill. Two, the pricing models that most people employ, it really makes that cost prohibitive. So there's kind of smarter ways to solve these things. I've seen way more acceptance there because the concern is that, well, if it's a litigation or an investigation, then I haven't looked at all these documents, and I am the arbiter of exactly what it is we should be looking at and what's right and what's wrong. Of course, we could have a very long conversation about how accurate that is, right? But the reality is definitely the areas of the law that are less dispute oriented, where people see a little bit less risk and maybe more reward. For example, extracting information out of contracts, seeing where we've, as a company, had the ability to raise prices but never did. Or are we exposed in any particular place? Did we agree to terms in one contract that is now in conflict with, say, a most favored nations clause in another contract that we have? So most systems don't have those, and even the contract AI systems sometimes are an all or nothing. So how can we do this on a case-by-case basis? And AI is a great place. So much better acceptance there. But I think across the board, we're seeing it with all forms of litigation, partially because even divorce cases now, we're seeing hundreds of gigs of data involved because our data universe is personally larger. So I think as it continues to crop up in even smaller cases, we're starting to see better acceptance.
So e-discovery is cropping up, as you say, even in divorce cases, even in smaller cases. What about the use of AI? So from what you were saying, it sounds as if litigation is the hard case, the place where it's most difficult to get people to try out AI. How do you get them there? Or what are their objections? What works and what fails?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, to be fair, some of the early adopters didn't have the best experiences because the AI tools just weren't as good. But now the newer generation of AI tools are significantly better, and they're producing way better outcomes and finding this information, even if it's just to help you make better decisions. We're not just relying on the AI models to do this. It's allowing us to get to the heart of the matter much faster. As I always say, we should optimize for the most expensive eyeballs. And though that's a bit tongue in cheek, that's truly what it is. I mean,
well, it's not tongue in cheek at all, because those most expensive eyeballs can be exceedingly expensive in today's market.
Yes, they can. So how do we put the most relevant set of data that is most accurate in front of them? Maura Grossman was excellent. Oh, Dr. Maura Grossman, excellent. And it's interesting because her background is she was a psychologist before she was an attorney. So she's always been thinking about how do people think about things and how do people express themselves, and started applying that into newer early tools that she started seeing back then. And now we've just gotten to the point where you can ease people into it using, say, conceptual clustering to show, here's some keywords you hadn't thought of. You can still do your keyword thing, but yeah, here's some you might not have thought of before. And then they start seeing that. And I think, honestly, Brainspace has done a lot to really push that needle forward, because the representation in the wheel with the clusters to be able to see it's something a little easier for people to get their minds around. Back in the early days, there was a system, I believe it was a 10X. It kind of looked like Petri dishes, and it was a big heat map in Petri dishes, and people didn't quite get it.
And that was back in the early 2000s.
Yes, exactly. I mean, that's some of the earlier days. And they got a lot of adoption and they were quite successful, but it still confused the heck out of people. So I think, like anything, adoption has a lot to do with ease of use, as well as starting to see, even in small ways, the impact it can have. So, email threading, for example, a visual email threading, we saw employed in a case. It was a large auto manufacturer, and they were not using it. And we said, the corpus is predominantly email. Why are you not using email threading, visual email threading, to see where are the inclusive emails? Where are emails we might have missed? Where are there coding collisions? And this is like small AI and even smaller still, right? Some would never even call that artificial intelligence. But the reality is, turning that on, they then went forward and they compared the results before and after, and they saved almost $1 million from that point on, just on this review. So no matter how big or small the review is, or even our investigation or what fact patterns we're trying to find, it makes sense to use these tools because it can get to the answers faster. Not all of us can hold and find conceptual clusters. We don't all know that a diamond is baseball as well as a ring, as well as a shape on a card. So it all means different things to different people, and that's what these models help us do and tease out and find.
At the beginning of our discussion today, I mentioned that you, for most practical purposes, seem to live on an airplane all the time now. And that includes next week, right? What's coming next week?
It does, yeah. So like I said, I've been doing this a while, so I'm really fortunate. I've met great people like yourself and others. And I got a call a couple weeks ago from a friend of mine, James Shearer, at Baker Hostetler, and he says, "Hey, we got this paper on soft AI and soft law that's coming out in a peer-reviewed journal. Interestingly enough, not in a legal journal. So it's in a journal of AI and robotics and automation. It's about to be published as we speak." And he said, "We want to do a lunch and learn around this. Can we do it this quick?" And I said, "Yeah, why not?" So the authors were James, Ariana Dindio, one of his associates, and your own Kat Casey. So we put together on the fly a lunch and learn for next week. So it's next week, Thursday the 9th, in Austin, right downtown. Found an excellent venue to do it at. So, a few dozen of us are going to get together and have an hour and a half long conversation on kind of the notion of soft law, and where does AI fit into that, and how can we
step back a little bit as you give us this preview. What do you mean by soft law?
People are going to have to tune in to find out. I mean, they're going to have to go
You're not telling us now.
No, that's one of the teasers. You definitely have to go there, and we'll have copies of the article for folks to be able to use for further on. But it's quite excellent. James, as well as Kat and now Ariana, have always been great thinkers around how are these things being used in ways we didn't really anticipate. And we even talk about the Turing test and gaps and all kinds of things in terms of, again, just how do we think about these things and how can the machines help us do these things a little better?
If people are interested, how do they find out more?
Well, a number of ways. So if you haven't already been invited, definitely check out LinkedIn. So you'll find most likely in Kat's own feed, in Cobra Legal Solutions feed, there is a link. So there's an Eventbrite site you can go to. It's free. We'll feed you, and you'll learn about soft law and AI and how you can use this maybe even in your own hard law areas, the more discrete areas of law, to be able to apply AI to produce better outcomes.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Doug. Doug Kaminski is the Chief Revenue Officer at Cobra Legal Systems. I am George Socha. This has been this has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Doug, thank you so much for joining this week.
Thank you, George. Have a great weekend, everyone.